Elena sat by the small window of her father's wooden house, staring at the fading horizon. Her heart was heavy, knowing her father's patience had run out. For weeks, their arguments had grown louder, about her choices, her refusal to marry the man he had chosen, her bold words in a time when women were expected to remain silent. She was young, strong-willed, and unafraid to speak her mind, but that spirit only fueled her father's anger. That evening, as the flames of the hearth flickered, her father's face looked harder than stone. The elders of the village sat nearby, shaking their heads at her defiance. He stood before her, his shadow long against the wall. "You have brought shame upon this house," he said with a voice that cut like steel. "Your tongue is wild, your heart is stubborn. I cannot keep you under this roof any longer." Elena's chest tightened, her eyes widening in disbelief. She searched her father's face for mercy, but there was none. His words struck her like a thunderbolt. "You will go to the Apaches. Let them teach you what discipline means. Let them tame you, if I cannot." The room fell silent. Even the fire seemed to die down, as though shocked by his decree. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The Apaches. To her, they were fierce, proud warriors, spoken of with both fear and respect. No one in her village had ever been sent there willingly. "Father, you can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. But he did not look at her. He turned away, his decision final. That night, Elena lay awake, tears stinging her eyes, her heart pounding with dread. She wasn't sure if this was punishment, or exile. By dawn, she would be taken to a world she did not understand, to people she only knew through stories whispered by firelight. Yet deep within her, beyond the fear, a small ember of defiance still glowed, uncertain if it would destroy her or save her. The morning came far too quickly. The cold air clung to Elena's skin as she was led from her father's house. Two men from the village walked beside her, carrying nothing but a small bundle of food and the clothes she wore. She had no jewelry, no trinkets from her childhood. Her father had ordered that she take nothing. To him, she was no longer part of the family. Her bare feet crunched against the dry earth as they reached the edge of the valley. Beyond it stretched the untamed land, the rocky hills and sparse trees that led toward the Apache camp. Elena had only seen those lands from a distance, yet now she was being pushed toward them as though she were a stranger, an offering. One of the men glanced at her with pity. "Elena, be strong," he whispered under his breath. But before she could answer, the other silenced him with a sharp look. They waited at the crossing point until dark figures appeared from the horizon. The Apaches arrived on horseback, moving with a grace and power that made Elena's stomach twist with fear. Their leader dismounted, a tall man with piercing black eyes, his hair tied with leather strips. His expression was unreadable, but his presence was commanding. The villagers stepped back nervously. Elena's escort announced, "Her father sends her as punishment. She belongs to you now." The Apache leader's eyes rested on Elena, studying her as if weighing her spirit. For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Elena's heart raced. She expected anger, mockery, or disdain. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as though intrigued. Without a word, he gestured for her to mount the spare horse. The men of her village pushed her forward, and Elena's legs trembled as she obeyed. She gripped the reins with unsteady hands, her throat dry. The Apaches turned and rode off into the wilderness, the sound of hooves echoing in her ears. She dared one last glance back at her village. Her father stood in the distance, arms crossed, his face as unyielding as stone. Her chest ached with betrayal, but she knew this was it. There was no going back. She was no longer her father's daughter, no longer a villager. She was now in the hands of the people she had been taught to fear. And somewhere deep inside, as the campfires of the Apache came into view, she realized her life was about to change forever. The sun had set by the time Elena reached the Apache camp. Shadows of towering cliffs loomed overhead, and the glow of firelight danced across the circle of lodges made from hides and wooden poles. The smell of smoke, leather, and roasting meat filled the air, strange and unfamiliar to her senses. She slid clumsily from the horse, her legs weak from fear and exhaustion. Several women and children peeked from behind the lodges, whispering in their own tongue. Their curious eyes followed her every move, some wide with suspicion, others with pity. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how small and out of place she seemed in this world. The Apache leader, the same man with piercing black eyes, dismounted with ease. His movements were calm but purposeful, like someone who had no reason to rush or prove himself. He gave a few commands in his language, and immediately the camp stirred. A woman approached, older, her hair streaked with silver. She looked Elena over, not unkindly, but firmly, and then motioned for her to follow. Inside a lodge, Elena was given a blanket made of animal hide. The warmth should have been comforting, but it only reminded her how far she was from home. She sat on the ground, her knees pulled to her chest, listening to the sounds of the camp, the beat of a drum somewhere, the laughter of children, the low voices of men speaking by the fire. Every noise made her tense. Her father's last words echoed in her mind. "This is your punishment." The weight of that truth pressed on her chest, and tears welled in her eyes. But she refused to let them fall. If these people saw her cry, they might see weakness. And she couldn't afford to be weak. After some time, the flap of the lodge opened. The Apache leader stepped inside. Elena stiffened, clutching the blanket tighter. He crouched down in front of her, his gaze steady, his presence filling the small space. For a long moment, he said nothing, only studied her, as though trying to read her heart. Finally, in broken Spanish, he spoke. "You, no slave here." Elena blinked in shock, unsure if she had heard correctly. He pointed to her chest, then his own, and said slowly, "Strong spirit. We respect." Her lips parted, but no words came. She had been sent here as punishment, discarded by her own father like something unwanted. Yet this man, a stranger, a supposed enemy, had spoken to her with dignity. As he left, she sat frozen, her thoughts tangled. Fear still clung to her, but beneath it, something new began to stir, a faint spark of hope. That night, as the fire crackled outside and the stars blanketed the sky above, Elena lay awake, realizing her life in this camp might not be the nightmare she had imagined, and that perhaps, her punishment could turn into something entirely different. Days turned into weeks, and Elena slowly began to understand the rhythm of life in the Apache camp. She still missed home, her bed, her father's house, the familiar language of her people, but she could not deny that something inside her was changing. At first, she had been treated like a stranger. The women gave her small tasks, like fetching water or grinding corn, and watched her carefully. Some children were bold enough to approach, their laughter ringing in the air as they tried to mimic her accent or braid her hair. Elena found herself smiling despite her fears. For the first time since her punishment began, her days felt less heavy. One afternoon, however, everything shifted. Elena was carrying a basket of corn near the fire when two young warriors, barely older than boys, blocked her path. They sneered, speaking words she didn't fully understand, but their mocking tone was clear. One reached for the basket, tipping it just enough that kernels spilled onto the dirt. The children nearby laughed, and Elena's face burned with shame. Her heart raced. She bent quickly to gather the corn, but before she could, a sharp voice cut through the air. It was him, the Apache leader. He strode forward with calm authority, but his eyes burned like fire. The young warriors immediately froze, their bravado vanishing. He barked a command in their tongue, his voice low but firm. The camp grew silent. Then, to Elena's astonishment, he bent down beside her. Without a word, he began picking up the scattered corn with his own hands. The murmurs around the fire grew louder. A leader, humbling himself for a girl who didn't even belong here, it was unthinkable. Elena's eyes widened. She whispered, almost in disbelief, why are you helping me?" He met her gaze steadily, his expression unreadable but gentle. "Respect," he said slowly, carefully forming the word in Spanish. Then he placed the last kernel back into her basket and stood tall, turning to the young warriors. His voice rose in their language, strong and commanding, and the two boys lowered their heads in shame before walking away. For a moment, Elena couldn't move. Her chest felt tight, her eyes stung, but this time it wasn't from humiliation, it was something else, something she hadn't felt since leaving her father's house. Safety. That night, as the stars shimmered above the camp and the fire crackled low, Elena lay wrapped in the blanket they had given her. She thought of her father's harsh words, of being sent here as punishment. Yet, strangely, she no longer felt abandoned. The Apache leader had shown her respect, dignity, even protection. And in that moment, Elena realized something powerful. Sometimes, family isn't about blood. Sometimes, it is found in the place you least expect, among strangers who choose to see your worth.